Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We're going to do our best to set the stage for a key Saturday matchup between Penn State and Wisconsin with you a little bit later on this episode. We will bring in a Badgers insider from our 24/7 Sports Network to get perspective on a Wisconsin squad that carries a 5-2 record and a 3-game win streak into this Saturday night showdown. Before we get to that, we'll hear from Tyler Calvaruso, our Lions 24/7 resident recruiting insider. It's a good time. It's 6 weeks exactly as we record here on a Wednesday, 6 weeks exactly away from the early signing period in college football, which was moved up a few weeks. It's normally had been closer to Christmas. Now it's going to be that first week of December. We're going to take a nice reset with this recruiting class for Penn State in 2025 cycle, position by position breakdown about where things stand, where we think Penn State has really consolidated a lot of talent in some specific position groups, and then who are the top remaining targets. I told Tyler Calvaruso to give us 3 of those. So we're going to break down remaining targets for a class that has more than 24 players on board already. If you missed it on Tuesday over at Lions247.com, we did have some breaking news regarding a couple former Penn State players, Kavion Keys, Nittany Lions, second-year Nittany Lions, who were expected to take on bigger roles in the defense this year. They were dismissed by the university this summer. That was confirmed going into preseason camp. Prior to that, they had been on interim suspensions with the football program. And then on Tuesday here, charges coming out in Center County court system. They're facing felony charges. And those include rape. Those include sexual assault. And so we are going to be monitoring that situation. Obviously, the best weekend in the middle of a football season. A couple of former players, again, Penn State created some distance between themselves and Keys and Lions a few months ago. But these guys were on campus not too long ago. It's a situation we'll be continuing to monitor. There's more over at Lions247.com. I didn't want to ignore that because it's clearly a pretty big deal here during this week. But we're going to keep that coverage at Lions247.com. If more breaks, if there's something to discuss there, we'll bring it to the show. But for now, we'll keep the focus on this upcoming Wisconsin matchup and Tyler Calvaruso's recruiting takes, which we're going to dive into right now. Tyler, welcome back on to the Lions 24/7 podcast.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And like I laid it out there in the intro, we are suddenly 6 weeks shy of the early signing period across college football. That means that we are getting very close to Penn State sealing the deal with about 24 prospects who've been on board for different periods of time. Many of them will be on campus about a month later as January enrollees leaving high school early. But there's also more work to be done as Penn State tries to maximize its opportunities in this recruiting cycle and perhaps drive home the fact that they are 6-0, number 3 in the country. And that comes with some opportunities as well. So appreciate you joining us. We're going to go position by position. But generally speaking, as we're 6 weeks out of this thing, how do you think this Penn State class has come together, particularly as the flip front has been rewarding for this program?
Flip front's been big. You know, you saw some misses going back to the winter with Cam Smith and then the summer with Matthew Allen. At the time, those were viewed as, especially with Alton, given his placement on the wide receiver board. I think Smith, things were in a different place in when he committed to Duke. Tom Allen just jumping on board as defensive coordinator, Smith's relationship with Manny Diaz. So there were a lot of it was a different kind of recruitment for sure between now and then. But getting those two guys on board as flips really helped the outlook of the class. There have been some big wins. Malachi Goodman, who's now a top 100 prospect out of New Jersey, a little bit later, just before Labor Day, he got into the class. That bolstered the group. You're seeing this group come together, I think, quite nicely. It's a top 15 class with the potential to rise, given the names still out there and, well, not necessarily available for the taking, given the fact that the majority of Penn State's efforts being dedicated to the flip front right now. But, a guy like Chaz Coleman from Ohio, who just locked in an official visit, he's still an uncommitted high school target. So between the flips and a guy like Coleman, Penn State's still monitoring those late risers, there's still some spots to be filled in a class that I already find to be a pretty solid group.
You mentioned some risers. There was a recent rankings update at 24/7 Sports for the top 24/7. Jaden Woods, defensive end from Kansas, jumped up to the number 1 spot overall in this class. He's number 75 nationally, number 7 among edge rushers. And then LeVar Arrington Jr., who we'll get to in a little bit when we talk about linebackers, guy that maybe does bring some positional versatility to this defense moving forward. He certainly has been a versatile high school player out in California. but LeVar Arrington Jr. soaring up into the top 24/7 solidly, 123 overall, number 9 athlete nationally. And I just wanted to mention a couple updates there because there are some recruits here, particularly trending in a very positive direction as the signing period approaches, and we'll address them as we go. But let's begin at the quarterback spot. We'll go position by position here. Often when you focus on recruiting class, so much of the concentration early does rely on what are they going to do at quarterback. We know in the last class, Penn State was able to bring in a guy they were really excited about, Ethan Grunkemeyer, someone who was a major riser in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, ended up just outside of the top 100 overall. You're kind of trying to stack players like him, like Drew Aller, these players who are considered, to be blue chip elite territory among the positional peers. That's not going to happen every class. And right now, if you're looking to compare and contrast rankings and ratings with Penn State's current quarterback commit, with maybe some of the others in the Big Ten, some of the other playoff contenders out there, you might be let down. And as usual, we say when it comes to Beckham Kritza, there's a lot more to the story than meets the eye.
Yeah, really, it's about the tools. It's about the arm talent. It's about the upside the Penn State staff believes that he has. And it's been a roller coaster of a high school career for him. 5 schools in 4 years now that he's at Chaminade-Madonna down in Florida, playing with fellow Penn State wide receiver commit Kobe Howard, and he's getting settled in there after starting the year at Miami Central. Didn't really go his way there and was relegated to a reserve role following a week 1 loss. The important thing is, and we've really hammered this home for a while now, is that he's back on the field and he's getting reps, because those are just crucial in his development. I think that kind of goes without saying. He's not going to get any better. Sure, he could put in work behind the scenes on the practice field, on his own training, but nothing replicates those in-game repetitions that Kritz is now getting at Chaminade-Madonna. So that's a big plus. He's going to be under center as they gear up for what they're hoping is a deep postseason run. They've got one more regular season game against Cardinal Gibbons. Kritz only played 1 quarter this past weekend against Avant-Garde. He had 4 touchdowns. He threw for 3. Actually, also caught one on a nice little trick play. So even this past weekend, we talk about the reps. He didn't really get a whole lot of them just because of the nature of the game. It was a blowout quite quickly, but Cardinal Gibbons upcoming this weekend, he'll be on the field a whole lot more. So when you evaluate Kritza and, his plays as Penn State's 25 quarterback, you make a great point. It is difficult to stack elite quarterback take after elite quarterback take on a cycle basis. It's not an easy thing to do, but you understand why Kritza is part of the class. If you're, just especially now with the expanded limits on scholarships and whatnot, the numbers you can have in a recruiting class, the take makes sense from that standpoint. And even beyond Kritza, there have been feelers out elsewhere in the right situation. This bye week was a pretty good example of that. James Franklin stopping at Springford, which is, home to 5-star Missouri quarterback Matt Zollers. It doesn't sound like that's something that is necessarily likely to happen or anything of that nature, but Penn State's not giving up, and that doesn't surprise you if you're a Penn State fan, given the way the staff has approached this flip season. They're not giving up on any of the guys that they had high on their board at one point, have familiarity with, feel they have good relationships with. Zollers falls into that category, so he's just one. But again, when it comes to Kritza, it's just going to be very interesting to see how his development takes off or doesn't take off when he gets to campus. Because we've seen him in person a bunch. You see that he's a work in progress, and he's been making strides in the right direction. You guys saw it during the summer, really. You got eyes on him more than me. That as the summer went on and as he camped for the staff and worked with Danny O'Brien and worked with Andy Kolnick and worked with James Franklin, and even got some working with Drew Aller, who was on the intramural fields outside of Louisville Hall, giving those guys, well, not the intramural fields, the practice field outside Louisville Hall, giving Kritza some pointers. He was making strides in the right direction. What's that going to look like when he's at Penn State full-time working with the staff? Will his development continue to ascend and head in the right direction? Penn State's hoping so. That's why he's part of this class.
This is one of the more challenging evaluations I've encountered covering recruiting, especially Penn State the quarterback, because you've had 2 offensive coordinators involved here. Mike Yursich, of course, was there when they first offered the young man, and then he committed like 2 days after Yursich was fired. And then, of course, Andy Kolnick has now had 10, almost 11 months where if he wanted to shake Beckham Kritza and he was convinced that Kritza wasn't going to be a fit for what he wants to do offensively, there's been chances to do that. Same as Danny O'Brien, same with James Franklin, to get that message across. And Kritza came back a couple weeks ago, spent time on campus, was with some fellow commits, was with the coaching staff. He's a guy who's done all the right things in terms of making sure he's present as a prospect within this class, helping recruit other players. I think he's been all in when it comes to a lot of that stuff. But the thing I find trouble to balance is the lack of reps. It's kind of deflating to see how it turned out for him at Miami Central this year, where we were looking forward to maybe him having this big opportunity in the spotlight. To his credit, and because he's in Florida, he's able to kind of steer the wheel and end up still in a significantly good situation at Chaminade Madonna. That's a program that no one's going to sneeze at, always has Power 4 talent. But at the same time, he's trying to fight for reps at some of the premier programs in the state of Florida. And before that, out in one of the premier programs in Southern California. And so I look at his career and I'm saying, well, if he's at Fairview High School in Colorado for all 4 years, what kind of prolific stats is he putting up? What kind of passing numbers, film can we all point to and say, here's what Beckham Kritza is? You got a 4-season sample size of who he is as a quarterback versus Kritza. And we know that there's family stuff tied into his movement, but clearly a young player who was not intimidated to pursue opportunities at high levels of the prep game, whether it was Miami Central, whether it was out in Orange County, California. So I just think it's tough because if we had talked about, public school in Colorado kind of quarterback here, there'd be a lot more to point to. And because he's competing very high rungs of the ladder at the high school level, the opportunities haven't come the way he's backed up other power conference quarterback recruits at different points in his career. And now we'll see. I just think this is one where you really got to trust the Penn State coaching staff because they have a lot more eval on the kid than anyone in this industry at this stage. And you're right. Momentum did seem to be building during the summer with some of that intensive workout with the coaching staff here at Penn State. I know he was fairly receptive to the coaching, but this one's tough to read on. And I think that when you talk about him coming in the middle of, Ethan Grunkemeyer last year, who's just about top 100 guy, and then Troy Hune in the 2026 class, who might end up being a top 100 guy. He's a 4-star in 24/7 sports evaluations. Maybe this is a good spot to bring in a player who could be a multi-year project, who could be an investment for you, and you're rewarded down the line if the 6'5", 200+ pound Beckham Kritza does turn into a baller for you on the Big Ten field. But to your point about scholarship availability, to what they've been able to do with the quarterback room to this stage, I don't think they're relying on a freshman quarterback next year to come in and compete for the starting job regardless. So I think all those pieces stack up to say, all right, let's see what Penn State can make of what has been a messy situation at times. Get Kritza here, get him in one stationary spot for a sustained period of time, and find out what he looks like on the other side of that process. So we'll learn a lot about Beckham, and for a one-man class at this position, I know we spent a good amount of time discussing it, but it is really one of the more unique circumstances that we've covered here with Penn State recruiting. At running back, Tyler, you got Tyke Hayes out of Western PA, and you got Jabri Wallace-Coleman out of Philadelphia. These two have formed a pair. They took different routes to end up in this running back class, but we know Jaywan Sider, cycle after cycle, it seems, wants to bring a couple guys on board to compete with each other and to compete with what is annually a very tough room to earn reps in.
It's a solid duo, two tough backs who could impact the game in a couple different ways. Both can catch passes out of the backfield. Both get the job done between the tackles. Both can use their speed to get to the outside and get to the edge. I think we just saw that with Tyke Hayes this past weekend. I mean, he ran for more than 300 yards in a rare Aliquippa loss to an undefeated Montour team. Quips went down. Hayes was balling, though, man. He was doing his thing out of the backfield, and Penn State's been excited about him. They've been excited about Wallace-Coleman, who I think his prospect profile overall continues to rise in my eyes. Getting eyes on him, this is my first time seeing him in person, was Under Armour Baltimore in May. And I think entering that camp, maybe I had some questions about his speed, his hands, stuff like that. He tested well, caught the ball well during one-on-ones. I always knew who he was as a runner, just based on film. The tough guy, physical, embraces contact and run through contact, get to the second level, reads his blocks well, has nice patience out of the backfield, doesn't hit his holes too quickly, lets things develop in front of him. So knew who he was as a runner, saw everything else I needed to see. And now that he's part of this class, I think Penn State's pretty optimistic about his future. It seems like they're pretty set with those two, I think if anything, in addition at running back, probably come in the portal season. I think those two guys from the high school perspective, Penn State set with those guys, and it's a good group to be set with because, again, Hayes and Coleman, they're kind of similar, but they're different, and that's what you want in your running back class.
We know what that running back tandem did for this team. 20 and Kaytron Allen, different look for a couple of years. They brought multiple running backs on the class. Cam played a snap. London Montgomery found the transfer portal after spring ball earlier this year. And then the two current freshmen are on campus, Corey Smith, Quentin Martin. James Franklin told us on Monday that they're still trying to navigate things with Martin without maybe burning his red shirt, which would mean we wouldn't see much of him down the stretch, maybe a little bit of Corey Smith, but it sounds like they're trying to get to the end of the regular season with both of those red shirts intact, which in years past, it's been those red shirts have been burned at running back every single year. So another tandem to take a look at next year. And the big differentiating factor with next year's running back room was you might not have Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton to gobble up all those carries. So it could be a very different competitive outlook. At wide receiver, this is probably the spot that I think has fluctuated the most in terms of external expectations on what the class was going to look like. Matthew Allen was a huge pickup, flipping from Virginia Tech, top 24/7 talent, guy that they missed on early in the summer, but ultimately were able to add this season. Jeff Exeter Jr. out of McDonough down in Maryland, a familiar school. Lyric Samuel was the initial wide receiver on board. He's out of New York, long-limbed wide receiver that we've seen in camp a couple different times. And then Kobe Howard coming up from Florida. As you mentioned, he's now paired up with Beckham Kritza at Chaminade Madonna High School. What do you make of this foursome at wide receiver? And in your opinion, among this bunch, who do you think could come to campus and make some noise early?
It's still got to be Alton for me. I think he's just such a freak athlete. I know he took a little bit of a tumble in our most recent rankings update, which, quite frankly, I didn't really understand a whole lot. But I still think he has a chance to be the best player in this class when it's all said and done. I really do. And with that could come a potential early impact if he gets to campus, hits the ground running, picks up on the playbook, because the physical tools are all there. Speed there, size there, strength is there, and he's only going to keep getting better in that regard from an athletic perspective. So Alton could be that guy. I view Exner as a high floor kind of guy, so maybe he could get on the field early, maybe not. I think that he's going to be a really solid wideout at Penn State. I'm pretty optimistic about his future. It might not necessarily happen right away, but when I see a high floor guy, at least in my opinion, like Exner, they could possibly work their way into the equation a little bit sooner than most because there are certain aspects of their game where they might be a little further along than their fellow younger players. I think Exner falls into that category. Still has work to do, by no means a finished product or anything like that. Another guy saw it Under Armour Baltimore. You see where he needed to improve, but you saw his strengths as well. So I think that could bode well for him physically. Another guy physically built to play in the Big Ten. So that's a big plus for Penn State. There's no lagging physical development with Jeff Exner Jr., I could tell you that. Kobe Howard intrigues me in the sense that he's very dynamic with the ball in his hands. He does a lot of different things for Chaminade Madonna. He lines up out wide, can move around playing the slot, takes some carries. They try to get him into space. And there's versatility to his game. That was something the Penn State staff liked. They liked his ability to make the plays with the balls in his hands. So that was something the staff liked. And that kind of went into why he developed. Once the testing numbers were where they needed to be, that's why he essentially evolved into a take for the staff. And that's why he's part of this Penn State class. So there's excitement there. And then Lyric Samuel, who he probably doesn't fit necessarily the early impact part of the conversation. He still has to develop a little bit physically, add a little bit more muscle mass. But I'm really high on his ceiling. I think that once he comes into his own, seeing him in person earlier this fall didn't really do him justice. Ramsey Hall's quarterback play really wasn't the best. The offensive line going up against St. Joe's Prep, that was a mismatch. There wasn't a whole lot of time to throw the ball. Samuel being what he is as a receiver, that's going to limit the impact he can make and limit what I got to see from him that night. But I've seen him in camp, and the catch radius, he's good coming off the line. There are a lot of tools for him to work with as he works with Marcus Hagan and Mark Dupuis. I think that he's just – I think he's full of potential, man. I see it with him. I see it coming together at some point.
You mentioned that Matthew Outten took a little bit of a tumble. It went from 140 to 173 in our rankings last week. Still in the top 24/7 pretty securely. He was outside of the top 500 overall coming into the spring. So he's still overall very much a stock up. We had some highlights up from one of his recent performances last week at Lions247.com. I believe it was 4 total touchdowns, more than 300 total yards. He's taking snaps at the Wildcat. He's catching passes. He's running off the edge, doing a lot of different stuff for his high school squad right now. Let's finish up on the offensive recruiting class here. Over at tight end, it's Matt Henderson as a solo act for now. We'll talk about why that might change a little later. And then the offensive line, it's a 4-man show. Owen Alicine, Brady O'Hara, who's going to make that conversion from being a high school tight end out in Pittsburgh. We talked about him camping at offensive line this summer. And then Michael Troutman and Malachi Goodman, both out of New Jersey. Goodman is the latest pickup for this group. He's also the top-ranked member of this group.
Yeah, Goodman, he's a really good prospect. Can give you reps at tackle, give you reps on the interior. Top 100 guy. Penn State staff loves his makeup. He's a really solid kid, too, so he's going to be a fit in that locker room at Penn State. People have raved about him and his mental makeup and everything that goes along with him being a high-level prospect, so there's a lot of excitement with him. Troutman is part of an offensive line at DePaul that is among the best in New Jersey this season. DePaul is having itself a heck of a season. He's been paving the way for Boston College running back commit Nolan James, and he might not be as high of an upside guy as some of the others given his size, but I think he has the potential to be a solid interior offensive lineman at the next level. O'Hara remains a project. We're going to have to see how he takes to tackle when he gets to Penn State. We saw him camp during the summer. He took coaching from Phil Troutman well, but making that switch full-time, going to the next level, that'll be a pretty interesting development to follow. I still really label him as one of those high-ceiling projects. If he hits, there's still a lot of work to be done. But again, when you're taking the coaching well in a camp setting and we get to see that, it does bode well moving forward. And Owen Alicine, he just gets better every time we see him. He's having a good senior season at Avon Old Farms. I know he didn't make the jump this time around, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ends as a 4-star. I think his athletic upside, his background, the way he moves his feet, his mobility is really impressive for a tackle prospect his size. So there's a lot of excitement about him. And then Matt Henderson at tight end. First full-time season playing tight end for Powhatan, and it's paying off. He's coming off a big game and a loss. He's been uberly productive for Powhatan as a senior tight end. And again, he needs to improve as a blocker. I think that's something he's been hard at work trying to accomplish, but Penn State is so excited about his athletic upside. That's been the case since Ty Howell delivered the offer and the in-person evaluation that led to the offer. The athletic traits are there and the size is there. He's adding good weight and he's maintaining his speed. That's the biggest thing with Henderson because as a pass catcher, he's got it.
Yeah, last I checked, he's averaging more than 16 yards per catch on the season. He was over 30 receptions. So, yeah, he is stretching the field at that position. Again, he was a wide receiver type last year, trying to learn the game and learn the new position before he gets to a new campus at Penn State. We'll talk more about that tight end spot in a moment. But over on the defensive front, this D-line, Cortez Harris, Deshaun Burnett, who we've seen play some linebacker too, Randy Adarica, Jaden Woods, as we mentioned, he soared up national rankings. He is now the number 1 rated member of this recruiting class, regardless of position. And Ivan Kamaju. I don't want to ask you to break down all 5 guys so we don't have endless amounts of time. We also have to get to our Wisconsin breakdown. But maybe tell me what piques your interest most from this 5-man defensive line class.
Yeah, there are a couple different things. I think Woods being the top-ranked guy in the class now is well-deserved because his athletic makeup is elite. When Alan True, our guy Alan True, who covers the Midwest here at 24/7, caught up with one of Woods' trainers following his commitment to Penn State. He's trained some elite NFL guys. Woods has the makings of a first-round pick, in his opinion, so that speaks volumes. Burnett continues to be a standout at Amani Christian on both ends or both sides of the ball. And he's as athletic as they come in this Penn State class. Kamaju's, he's kind of the forgotten guy and the quiet guy in the class, but Paint Branch is undefeated. I got to go back and double check, make sure they're still undefeated after this weekend. But he's been a big part of a very good season down in Maryland. Got to give Cortez Harris some love too, man. That Riverdale Baptist team they're having a year, and he's part of it. He's been an impactful player off the edge, and they've had some big wins, and when you put on the tape from those wins, Harris is making a play in some regard.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Randy Adarica. I just felt like the ratings and rankings when he committed to the program didn't necessarily match up with where he was on that junior film. And
Yeah,
then I had a chance to go back this week and just take a look at how he's performing. This man is racking up tackles for loss again. He's almost at 20 tackles for loss, and we're not at a Halloween yet. And so to me, Randy Adarica, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets here, gets some more strength and conditioning under his belt. And he's somebody that when you're talking about defensive linemen who are impressing next summer, maybe if his name was near the top of that list in the way maybe Xavier Gilliam was mentioned, not necessarily someone who's going to show up to campus and be a wrecking ball as a freshman, but if you're hearing good things about a defensive lineman on the practice field, that's really where you want to start. And I could see Ederica coming in, making a strong impression. Not to shortchange any other guys you mentioned. I just felt like he's somebody that I think if folks go down the recruiting list, his rating and ranking isn't going to draw a lot of eyes. I'd encourage you to go check out his film for Miami Central because he is a fun watch. And so when I'm telling you, getting 3, 4, sometimes 5+ tackles for loss in these contests. And over at linebacker, Tyler, Cameron Smith made the move from Duke's recruiting class. We're going to talk about another guy who may be tempted to do that down the road here. But you've got him, LeVar Arrington II, who, as we said early on, really rising in our rankings at 24/7 Sports. And then Alex Taish, who's been in this class for a while now, in-state prospect. It's a nice trio, and it follows a two-man class that came to campus last year, and Anthony Specca and Kari Jackson that's been impacted a bit because Kari Jackson has been unavailable for much of the fall due to an injury.
Yeah, it's a nice trio. Arrington could wind up on the edge when it's all said and done. That's really just going to depend on where his physical development takes him. Penn State's happy with where he's at regardless because they just love the prospect. And he's firmly inside that top 24/7 now on our end, and rightfully so. Senior season film has been strong. Smith's senior season film has been strong at St. Joe's Prep. Another guy, I got the chance to see him in person, and he had a big night against Erasmus Hall going up against Lyric Samuel. He's one of their best players on defense, on a very talented defense. So I think that says a lot about Smith and where he's at in his development. There's a lot of confidence that he'll be able to get to Penn State, make an impact in Tom Allen's defense with his athleticism. Tesh was off to a great start. He suffered a shoulder injury that knocked him out for the year. And this is the second time that shoulder's been banged up. And, it's not an easy injury to deal with playing linebacker. It isn't. So we're going to have to see how things go for him when he gets to Penn State. But he was having himself a really, really good senior season before that popped back up. And if he could get back to 100% and stay healthy, Penn State's going to have itself a really good linebacker at the next level.
I remember Charlie Katscher is a guy who was an in-state linebacker prospect, had some issues like that, recurrent injury issues coming to campus, and never quite able to shake it here. Hopefully, maybe a different turn of events for Alex when he becomes a college football player, but not the thing you want to be dealing with in your final high school season. At defensive back, we got 5 names to know there: Xavier Thomas out of Pittsburgh, Jameer Joseph out of New Jersey, Darius Dixon, top 24/7 talent who kind of kickstarted that summer commitment spree with his move out of Southern California. Braswell Thomas, who also dealing with an injury this year, one of the more compelling members of this class overall because he kind of resurfaced in a big way during camp season, got a spot in this class. And then Josh Johnson, who was another one of those flip pickups out of Ohio, had spent time in Louisville's class. He recently joined. Again, what stands out to you about the defensive back cluster here of cornerbacks and safeties before we get to your top 3 remaining targets?
Dixon's getting it done against the top talent on the West Coast. He's one of the best cornerbacks out in California. So given who he goes up against on a weekly basis, the level of competition he sees, you could maybe kind of pencil him as one of those guys. If he gets to campus and does everything that he needs to do, he'll have a chance to play early, whether that be at corner, whether it be at safety, depending on where things go for him. He's a really good prospect. Jameer Joseph has all the athletic traits to be, I believe, a high-level corner at the next level. I've seen him in person a bunch, so a lot of that stems from that, but I see it with him. He's having a good season for a St. Joe's Montvale team at the moment, the best in North Jersey. They suffered a pretty surprising upset loss to Don Bosco recently, but Joseph has just been an overall really impactful player in that secondary. Xavier Thomas, we talk about impact. I mean, it feels like every week at Central Catholic, he's scoring multiple touchdowns in an assortment of ways. So Penn State, they took him early. They were confident in that take. Feel even better about it now, given the way he's come along in his development. Josh Johnson's that really versatile chess piece in the secondary to give you reps at corner, safety, maybe even fit into that line role one day, depending on how he develops. So that's the newest addition of that defensive side of the ball is a good one and one that Penn State is excited about. The rankings aren't that high on Johnson. Penn State's evaluation is a whole lot different. I can tell you that. They're pretty bullish on his potential. And it's a shame what happened with Braswell Thomas. He's probably not going to be back at any point for the remainder of his senior year. So that's a bummer for him. But we got to kind of recount why Penn State took him in the first place. The testing numbers were very, very good. And he's been rehabbing, and he's going to be back. And when he gets to State College, he's going to have the chance to pick up where he left off this summer. So there's still plenty of excitement about him, even though he hasn't been on the field.
Appreciate that breakdown. And now we're going to finish off with what I tasked you with, the top remaining targets. Give us your top three. Why don't you start at 3, work your way to 1, and then we'll say goodbye.
This was tough, man, because there are a lot of guys out there still on the flip front who are really good players. And it's tough because you have to factor in not only level of talent, but positional need and, potential early impact, stuff like that. 3, I put Bradley Gompers. I was really stuck between him and Lex Cyrus, a couple of in-state guys, because you can never have enough speedy, dynamic wide receivers. The reason I gave Gompers the nod, Cyrus he's not a project necessarily, but he's still a speed guy who has to come along more as a receiver. Really good prospect, don't get me wrong. But you look at what Gompers is doing as a senior at Central Catholic and where he's ranked now. We've got him at 104, going from unranked outside the top 24/7 into that almost top 100 range. I mean, he's having a hell of a year. He's athletic as heck. There are a lot of programs that want him. Penn State loves him as a potential addition at linebacker. Got him on campus for the UCLA game. Going to continue pushing. Gomper's expected to pop up at Miami. Michigan just jumped in with an offer. So this one's not done. And you also got to acknowledge, too, the Duke commitment. That's not just a placeholder or anything like that. He loves the Duke staff. He loves that defense that Manny Diaz has in Durham. So that's a legitimate factor in this recruitment as well. This is not just a guy looking for a bigger, quote-unquote, bigger opportunity. That commitment, it's really weighing on him. At 2, another in-state guy. James Franklin was out to see him during the bye week. Top 100 tight end Andrew Olish. Elite tight end prospect. As much as Penn State loves Matt Henderson, if you got an opportunity to stack that with another high-end prospect at the position, given what you have going on right now with Tyler Warren thriving, Luke Reynolds seeing the field early, Penn State's pushing to get Olish on board. He's looking to visit. Oregon's in that mix. Bama was in that mix, but the Tide just flipped the tight end. Hearing 2 is maybe a number for them at that position in the class. Where things go with Olish and Crimson Tide, I don't quite know right now, but Penn State's right in that mix with the Michigan commit. Oregon's in that mix. We're going to have to see how these next couple weekends play out on the visit front for Olish. That'll be the key. But again, James Franklin out to see him during the bye week. That, Penn State wants him. There's no doubt about that, and they're going to continue working this one. Another one they're going to keep working. He's got to be the top remaining guy in terms of talent, right? Man, Brandon Finney from McDonough. And there's some positive vibes here. There really are. I don't want to say optimism because he still has to make that Michigan official visit. He's still committed to Oregon, but Penn State's been pushing a lot of the right buttons with Brandon Finney. He's got all the McDonough ties to the program. He's got Exeter, his high school teammate, committed. Has former McDonough teammates in the program right now. So you're hearing a lot of the right things with Finney heading into this weekend, but it's still not going to be easy. We are exactly 6 weeks from the beginning of the early signing period. There's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be fireworks. Finney, we're monitoring him really, really closely right now, but he's got to be my top remaining guy.
Tyler, appreciate the perspective on Penn State recruiting. We'll have you on again next week. We'll have a big home matchup to look forward to with Ohio State coming to town and a bunch of recruits planning to be in attendance for that matchup. Between now and then, check out Tyler's coverage at Lions247.com for the latest in Nittany Lions recruiting. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, man.
As promised, we continue this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast with focus on Penn State's upcoming opponent. They're going to travel to Madison, Wisconsin, take on a 5-2 Badgers squad under the bright lights on Saturday evening. Big opportunity for the Wisconsin team, a chance for Penn State to improve to 7-0, work its way toward that college football playoff appearance. And to learn more about Wisconsin, we bring in one of our 24/7 Sports Network reporters who was based up there, and he covers the Badgers on a daily basis. Nick Osen joins us right now on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Good to have you on, Nick.
Tyler, man, I've been looking forward to this. Thank you so much for having me. And what a treat. I think we're about to have a big-time game in Madison this weekend.
Yeah, let's start there because I can been detecting it from our interactions this week, and I can hear it in your voice early that there is definite buzz about this opportunity for the Badgers to take on the number 3 team in the country, Penn State. Can you just tell us, kind of lay the groundwork a little bit? What are the vibes, the mood, whatever else you want to describe it as right now around campus?
Yeah, well, I've got a little anecdote that I think describes it really well. I actually had the opportunity to speak with some current students just as kind of a former alumni type event. And, before people even knew kind of my current role, everybody was talking about Halloween weekend and the game and can't wait for Saturday and that type of thing. So I think that the atmosphere, Camp Randall's generally good to really good, but I think at night games, it's especially pretty spectacular. And I think this is an opportunity that, a lot of the fan base and obviously the team and the staff are not going to take for granted. And when we talk about the football side a little bit, and I know we'll get deeper into it, Tyler, I think that there's a reason, my friend, that, the line is like Penn State's favorite, obviously, but the line is trending a little bit closer to Wisconsin. I think people are seeing that the Badgers are playing that brand of football that many of us expected. And I think either way, whoever may win this game, I think it's going to be a terrific atmosphere and a really, really tight game.
Looking at the schedule for Wisconsin leading up to this point, they had a couple non-conference victories early on against Western Michigan and South Dakota. Not going to move the meter much. They didn't cover the point spread in either of those games either. Then they lose by 32 at home against Alabama. They lose on the road at USC. Strong start, but a 17-point loss in Los Angeles. 3-game win streak, though, against Purdue, which might be the worst team in the conference, at Rutgers, who's sputtering now after a strong start, and then a 23-3 victory at Northwestern last Saturday. That's a sub-500 Wildcats team right now. So with that in mind, how much are you and Wisconsin fans going to learn about this squad on Saturday, considering who they've beaten and who they haven't beaten?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think regardless, we are going to learn something. I think when you put kind of some of those opponents like a little bit under the microscope, I think that does make me step back a bit. However, when you look at the margin of victory, I believe it's been 117-16. And as we know, and as you certainly know, Tyler, covering Penn State, like defense is something that can translate. Offense, maybe you can judge a little bit more, but when you're allowing just 1 touchdown in 3 games, which this program had not done in the span of 3 games, I think in 9 seasons, and within Big Ten play, I think it's been about 25 years. That type of thing translates. And so I think we're going to learn a little bit more, I will say, about the offense. And, in doing my research, and of course I've done a little bit extra for a game of this magnitude. I know that Penn State always has the 4- and 5-star talent. They've got the potential, but that D-line is really impressive, and the run defense is especially impressive. I believe a top 10 unit, certainly with some of their defensive categories. So I think we're really going to learn more about this offense. Quarterback Braden Locke has absolutely had some really high moments. He also has turned the ball over a little bit. And against a team like this, in a game that, with the talent that Penn State has, a game can kind of get away from the Badgers. And that's why I think it's so imperative for Locke and the offense to play nearly mistake-free football.
Tyler Van Dyke, kind of a journeyman at this point in his career, was lost early in the season with an injury against Alabama. He was the starting quarterback. You mentioned they turned to Locke. One thing that I heard from Penn State cornerback Jalen Kimber, a starter for this defense, on Wednesday morning, right before we recorded, is that they've noted there are more deep shots coming from Wisconsin with Locke at quarterback. And I went back and I took a look. Average depth of target with Van Dyke at quarterback was about 7.5 yards. Mm-hmm. Right now it's about 10 yards with Locke at quarterback. So how has this offense maybe changed, evolved a bit with the change at quarterback?
Yeah. So, what's interesting, I think something like this, Tyler, can get thrown around a little bit, but Braden Locke is essentially like a coach on the field. He is like in lockstep with, offensive coordinator Phil Longo. Actually, some of his recent like audible and check numbers showed that a little bit. So I think that there's a real trust there. There certainly was in Tyler Van Dyke, but Locke has been around this program, the offense known Longo a little bit longer, from my understanding. And so on the field, I think that there's a little bit, maybe more responsibility on his shoulders because of his knowledge of the game. I think he does throw a nice deep ball. He's not as big or as mobile necessarily as Van Dyke, but he's had some really nice connections with wideout Vinny Anthony. He's a guy that has really kind of burst on the scene with his speed and route running ability. And then in addition, because the offense has opened up a little bit further, you're starting to see kind of some of that Longo creative run game that you saw with guys like Javonte Williams at North Carolina and so on and so forth, Michael Carter. So I think it's been, really, I'm not just going to say a positive, because I think that Van Dyke was trending well too, but it's been far from a negative. I think there's a trust there, and the offense seems to have really rallied around this young quarterback.
You mentioned Vinny Anthony. He's averaging about 24 yards per reception on 13 catches. Will Pauling at the wide receiver position been more of the possession type target for them, 10 yards per catch, but 30 catches on the season. And you mentioned the ground game, and that's something else that's come up in conversation with people inside Penn State facilities this week as they prepare for this matchup, is not just that they've been able to get the ground game going, but they're also able to tailor some of their passing game off that with an uptick in play action success. So who are the weapons? I mentioned a couple of receivers there, but what's happening in that backfield right now? Who's leading the way?
Yeah, so this is a name that, I'm not sure many in Big Ten country really would have searched for as much. Obviously, he was at a kind of a big-time program then in the Big 12. Tawi Walker, Oklahoma running back transfer. We were writing about him back in March and April, right, during spring ball. We were really impressed. I think it took a little bit, though. Like you mentioned, the first couple games, Wisconsin maybe didn't blow the doors off of those opponents. And then I think he was a little bit dinged up. Ches Malusi was another veteran in the backfield. And there's depth there, Tyler. It's one of the best, I'll say one of the deepest backfields, certainly in the conference when you look 1 through 4, 1 through 5. But he has really emerged as the RB1. Rushing for, at one point, he had the most rushing touchdowns in the nation, tied for it at 8. I don't believe he scored at Northwestern, but still another 100-yard day. So he's a guy to look out for, and certainly to know. Darian Dupree is a young running back that they really like. Is kind of a pass catcher out of the backfield. Cade Yakimelli is probably the leading rusher in terms of yards per carry, like yards per touch in there. And then I'll also mention as a pass catcher, like you said, Will Pauling. He was one of the top receivers in the conference last season, has also dealt with some injuries, and I think Anthony's emergence has opened things up in the wide receivers room too.
Yeah, the last few games with Walker, just reviewing those as you were giving your answer there, 126 yards on 23 carries at Northwestern, 198 yards on 24 carries with 3 touchdowns at Rutgers. He also had 3 touchdowns, 94 rushing yards the week before at Purdue. So obviously been a big-time star for Wisconsin during this 3-game win streak. You told us earlier that the defense has probably proven more to this point than the offense. What was it, 16 points allowed during the 3-game win streak? That tells you something. What is this unit doing that it's finding success in? And if there's anything you're wondering about against this Penn State offense and the weapons that it's going to bring to campus, what may be an exploitable component of this defense based on what you maybe have or haven't seen thus far?
Yeah, I think what this group is really doing is they've kind of established that they can roll with multiple guys, specifically along the D-line and linebackers. There's a trust there, and as that's been such a key focus, it really can keep guys fresh. The defensive line actually lost their best player, James Thompson Jr., before the season really got rolling, but some other players have emerged. Kurt Neal has been good. Elijah Hills, an Albany DL transfer, has been really good. And then the linebackers, Wisconsin is one of the best schools, so that you expect that with a guy like Mike Tressel working with the linebackers. A name that many might know if they watch SEC football, Jaheim Thomas is a transfer from Arkansas. He's really kind of figured out, Big Ten football the last couple of weeks. He's not going to blow you away with his speed, but good at diagnosing, a hard hitter. Another guy on the outside, Daryl Peterson. And then you've got a couple people in the secondary that I'm sure many know. Hunter Wooler was an All-Big Ten guy last year, and Ricardo Holman at corner, actually an All-American last season, I believe All-Third Team All-American. And in terms of, kind of matching up with that Penn State offense, I'm really curious about the pass rush because as good as the defense has been, that maybe hasn't been the greatest strength for the Badgers. And obviously, when you've got, Tyler Warren catching passes, the at least two-headed monster in the backfield, and Aller, there's a reason he's projected likely a day one pick in the NFL. Like, you can't give all those guys a ton of time. So I look for some creativity from Mike Tressel and this defense specifically coming from the linebacking core.
6 sacks surrendered through 6 games for Penn State. Aller threw 43 times at USC, was not sacked once in Los Angeles. So, yeah, we'll see how that part of the matchup shapes up. When it comes to Wisconsin's special teams and when it comes to injury concerns, I'm going to lump these two together because these are two things that we too routinely overlook when it comes to upcoming matchups. So, what do we need to be aware of, the good, the bad, and the ugly on special teams? And then are there some notable names that in Madison you either know aren't going to play this Saturday or that you're monitoring that situation?
Yeah, so I'll do the injuries first. The team outside of like Van Dyke, that being established early, James Thompson Jr., they've been pretty healthy. Going into like last week, there was nobody listed as questionable. So it was kind of like the guys that are out, they've been out. And a name that missed last game, and I'd say is one to monitor. We haven't gotten like real official clarity yet. Is wideout Bryson Green. Of course, it's very unfortunate, for him to miss time and be out. But a key thing is that's a group that has shown some depth. And outside of that, it's really the team's in a pretty healthy spot. Certainly looking at starters and thinking about the defense. And then with special teams, I would say it's been overwhelmingly positive. There's one key area that hasn't maybe necessarily been quite as good, and that's the kicking game. Nathaniel Vakos had some high expectations coming into the year, and he's missed 2 or 3 kicks, all from like not necessarily the same yardage point, but kind of the same right side of the field a little bit. So that's been a bit of a concern. But punter Atticus Bertrams has had a terrific fall, and then punt coverage and kickoff coverage, at least before last week, were amongst the best in the Big Ten Conference. And that's something that Coach Fickell, Coach Matt Mitchell, and the staff really pride themselves on. So I think in a game that I expect to be close, special teams could certainly play a key role.
All right. So you expect a close game. I want to get a little more detail on that now. And you're going to put me on the spot too for your site this week as well with a prediction. But how do you see this one ultimately playing out in a really, what should be a strong environment there in Madison? How do you see Penn State, Wisconsin handling each other? And ultimately, where do you land on a score prediction?
Yeah, so I hope that, you and your respective listeners know this and have been able to gauge this. I've been impressed, with this program in Penn State and their season so far. Like, what are you supposed to do against maybe not great teams? Roll. I think the Illinois win was a good one. Obviously USC, that showed me kind of a lot of the guts that Penn State had. And this was a game, it was a toss-up for me coming into the year. It was a toss-up for me the last couple weeks. Now, I'm catering it a little bit towards the way that Wisconsin has been playing football. Obviously, I can see that a little bit more firsthand. This isn't throwing me off per se, but I did find the James Franklin off a bye stat. I think I heard from a CBS podcast. It was like 8-12, 8-13, which is obviously much less than his overall winning percentage. I don't buy into the look ahead necessarily, but I thought that was interesting. I just feel that the way that Wisconsin is playing defense right now and the fact that they haven't played their A ball the last 2 weeks, I think that, I'm sorry, 2 out of the last 3 weeks and still winning. I think Rutgers was like a perfect game. But Purdue, Locke had a bad turnover too early. Northwestern, Coach Fickell would tell you himself, that first half was not what the Badgers should have been. And they're still covering all these with ease. I don't know how often you've been to Madison, my man, but for a night game, Halloween weekend, I'm expecting the best atmosphere in 5 or 6 years. And it just feels like kind of a culminating moment for Fickell and this group to, just etch themselves, maybe not at the top of the Big Ten, but to potentially be up there. Like I mentioned, it's not going to be easy. I think Locke has to be basically perfect. Aller's thrown a couple picks, I think 4 this season to Locke's 5. So there have been a couple, even as much as he's impressed. I've actually got Penn State leading into the fourth quarter, 24-23. I think this goes pretty deep. And just a little bit of Madison magic, a late game-winning field goal from Vakos, 26-24, Wisconsin, in a thriller.
That's about as detailed of a prediction as we've heard in terms of how it plays out. So we appreciate that perspective. I don't know if a lot of our listeners or viewers will love that perspective, but I think they'll appreciate the honesty and what you brought to us from Madison. We'll see what happens Saturday night. We've got some more collaborating to do. Some of your content's going to be over at lions247.com. Some of my content is going to be over at your site for Wisconsin Raiders. So really appreciate it. We're looking forward to kickoff.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Nick Osen does a great job covering Wisconsin for our network within the 24/7 Sports. We will be back with you for another episode later this week, bringing back Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen for our final thoughts for this matchup. Between now and then, we'll have a chance to get back on the Penn State practice field. That'll be Wednesday afternoon into the evening. We'll hear from James Franklin. We'll hear from several players. You want to check out lions247.com Wednesday night into early Thursday for the latest from what we saw and what we heard on the Penn State practice field. Before Nick, we got Tyler Calvaruso breaking down the latest in Penn State's 2025 recruiting class efforts. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.